Okay, thanks so much to everybody for being here and being on time. And we've got a few seats for those late people that can come up and sit on the front row. So welcome and thanks for being here. And I also want to offer a welcome to those people who might be watching us online now or later. And the great thing about this is you'll be able to refer back to it later or share it with friends who might not have gotten the word about it today. Most of you know me, but not everybody knows. My name is Joyce Watkins King, and I'm one of the original members of our arts ministry here at West Raleigh. And I just can't believe it, but our arts ministry turned 10 years at the beginning of this year, so we're now working on to year number 11. Now, there were a few years where we didn't do much during COVID, besides make tons of masks. We kept our hands busy anyway. But we have been holding exhibitions in this space, which we lovingly call the Voice of the Spirit Gallery, during all that time. And they started out being shows of work by members of our church, and then they grew to our community. And then when we couldn't think of any more topics, we started having some solo shows and some traveling shows. And in fact, that was how we lucked onto meeting our speaker and our workshop presenter today, because she has had work in the national touring exhibition of Sacred Threads. And when we last hosted it last fall, it was the last day we had the show here, and I had met some friends to take them on a little quick tour, and we were standing in the sanctuary, and my good friend said, "Joyce, this is my very favorite quilt in the whole show." And then in the background, we heard this voice saying, "That's my quilt, that's my quilt." And it was Zahra, and she is from Durham, and she had come over to see the show on its last day. So we got to meet her and talk to her. In about 10 minutes, we felt like best friends. And that's because of her fabulous personality, in addition to her fabulous talent. So, my first thought was after Sauda walked off, I was like, Patsy, I wonder if we could get her to come here and teach us a workshop, because we had been wanting to do a quilt workshop for a good while, and specifically one that dealt with or was in honor of African American women. And we had been talking about it for well over a year, and things just weren't moving along. But it took meeting Sauda to kick us back into gear again and move this project along. So we're delighted that we found her, and I know you're going to love hearing from her and getting to see her work firsthand. Let me tell you just a little bit about her. She's a self-taught fiber artist who has been quilting for 25 years. Her favorite style, even though, as you can tell, she uses a lot of styles, is narrative quilt. And she packs a lot of narrative into one quilt. You can look and look and look and find more clues about the subject. Others have described her artwork as rousing and thought-provoking. And those are some of the best adjectives I could think of to describe her work. Her extensive body of work includes quilts about slavery, lynching, and key civil rights figures like Martin Luther King, Ida B. Wells, Nelson Mandela, Nina Simone, and Trayvon Martin, to name a few. She has been showing her work since 1999, and her quilts have been shown in numerous local, national, and international exhibitions. Her work has also been featured in quilting publications and magazines, and she has been commissioned by many private collectors from all over the United States. Indeed, we're not only blessed to have Sauda here to teach some of us how to make portrait quilts, which we're going to kick off right after after this event next door. But we are just so grateful that she let us have this small showing of her quilts that we could share with all of you. And I want to tell you a couple things. I put a postcard in everybody's seat. This show's only here for 2 more weeks, so help us get the word out to more people, share that, and let them know if they can't make it. At the very least, they can watch Sauda's talk online. And one other thing I wanted to mention, we have 15 quilts here, and there's a 16th. It is in the sanctuary. So after you get a chance to look at everything here and grab some refreshments, make sure on your way out, you go back to the first floor, and you go by the sanctuary, walk all the way down to the front on the left-hand side, and you will see her special narrative quilt to Polly Murray, our own Polly Murray from Durham, North Carolina. So you're in for a treat, and welcome so much, Sauda.
Thank you, Joyce, for that wonderful introduction. And you covered a lot of what I was going to say, so we may just be very informal here today. First, I would like to thank Joyce and the West Raleigh Arts Ministry for inviting me here to exhibit, first of all, and also to facilitate the portrait quilt workshop that Joyce mentioned. I would also like to express my gratitude to West Raleigh Presbyterian Church for opening their doors of the gallery for me to display my work that you see here. I think the Voice of the Spirit Gallery is a perfect name for the type of quilts that I create, because I'm always trying to bring out not only evidence of my spirit, but evoke someone else's spirit when they look at it. So thank you very much. I'm happy to be here to show you just this sampling of my quilts. But before I begin, I would like to recognize 2 people who have really helped me and formed my art journey. One is Henrietta James, who was my high school sewing teacher. I think a lot of us can relate to home economics classes, but she was, and that was a lot of years ago, but she was so instrumental in not only seeing something in me that I was too young to see in myself, and encouraged me to sew and to be serious about sewing. And so every time I sit at a sewing machine, I'm inspired by her to this day. And I've sewed since that day. I never stopped. So that says a lot about the teacher that I've had. I also would like to recognize another quilter that I met in the very beginning of my quilt journey, and her name is Hassie Body. She does live in North Carolina, and she is an amazing, amazing, amazing quilter. And the first quilt that I saw at my first quilt exhibit was, she was the guest speaker at the exhibit, and her quilt was like, I had never seen anything like that before. So as I was starting to quilt, and I was struggling with quilting and trying to be precise in blocks and squares and oh my, when I saw her quilt, I was like, wait a minute, is this a quilt? Maybe this is something I could do. And so she has a lot to do with the type of quilter that I am today. So I wanted to recognize those 2 people, and we can start the slides, please. So you've already heard most of this, so I'm not going to really belabor that. So we'll go to the next slide. I am fortunate to have had my quilts featured in many exhibition catalogs, and I just wanted to show some of those catalog covers here, also to maybe inspire you if you wanted to look at more type of art quilts that I make. These are some of the exhibitions that I have been in. The next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about just some highlights of my quilting journey. Again, I have been quilting for 25 years, and I'm very proud to say that. The fact that I stuck with anything for 25 years means a lot. I do not have, in terms of my quilting background, I don't have a family background in quilting like many people do. I don't have those stories of, growing up with heavy quilts on me to keep me warm or none of that. So I'm always in awe of people who can share those stories about the legacy of quilts in their family. But I was not fortunate to have that legacy. So I was exposed to quilting in 1998 when the African American Quilt Circle in Durham formed. One of my friends, she was instrumental, one of the founders, and she sent me an email and she said, Sauda, I think you might like this. Why don't you come to the first meeting? So, usually when she says something, she knows me. I said, okay, I'll come. And that was the beginning of my quilting journey. That first information meeting, we all decided we wanted to keep meeting, and 25 years later, we're still a strong quilting group in Durham, North Carolina. So that was my journey. When I started out, of course, I had to learn the basics, and I'm just not a precision person, so I had really struggled with trying to cut even, stitch even, blocks matching, and I was starting to kind of lose hope. But then when I saw that person's quilt I mentioned, I was like, wait a minute, okay, I think I can kind of veer off and do my own thing, and that's what I did. And I think that saved me and kept me quilting all of these years. I am self-taught. I rarely take a class. I just don't pay attention enough, so I just kind of, look on YouTube, or I just figure it out some kind of way. So I've been fortunate to be able to finish something, even if I don't know how it's going to get done. My quilting style, again, I moved from traditional quilts like in the very beginning, and started doing quilts that really started telling stories and giving me ideas that I had. I'm like, I wonder if I could make that into a quilt. Or I hear someone say something, I wonder if I can make that into a quilt. So that's how I really started focusing primarily on narrative quilts. There's so many stories that need to be told and shared, and quilts is a wonderful way to do that. My quilting, I do like to translate my quilts into like my own personal thoughts and experiences, and again, like Joyce mentioned, historical events, women's issues, and really so people can kind of see something about me through the creativity that I share with the world. My quilting trajectory, one of the main things I think that impacted my quilting was me deciding to become an exhibiting quilter. And I say decide because a lot of people quilt and their family may see it, but they're not interested in sharing it with anyone. But I just felt like I needed to put them out in the world. And that was a big step of faith, to get out of that comfort zone. What if somebody doesn't like it? It's okay if they don't. But I wanted to be an exhibiting quilter, and that decision has served me well for so many years. A lot of the exhibitions the catalogs that you saw were exhibitions that I was invited to participate because I went out on faith and showed up. And so I spent the last probably 15 years making quilts primarily for exhibitions. And that's a whole nother set of experiences and challenges when you step out like that. But that really changed my life in terms of being a quilter and being a recognized quilter. And my quilts have been places I probably never will go. So I'm being represented by my quilts. The next slide, please. So my mission, and I thought a lot about, why do I quilt? What is this really all about? If you're serious about doing it, you have to have some kind of driving force, and you need to be able to articulate that. So my mission is really to use my gift to shine a light on the past, to be a voice for the voiceless, address issues and concerns of the present, and more importantly is to leave my own creative footprint for the future. I really believe that I have been called to create the quilts that I create. At one of my exhibitions, a friend of mine went and she sent me an email. She said, Sauda, your quilts are beautiful, but they're so sad. And I'm like, well, I never thought they were sad, okay. But I think what she was trying to say is that a lot of the subject matter can evoke those feelings of despair and things like that. And so that's why I really feel like everybody can't make quilts like that. It takes a lot out of your soul and your spirit to be able to pull those tough, challenging experiences up, and somebody has to do it. So I feel like I was called to create those types of quilts. I'm still learning. I mean, I'm 25 years strong in the quilting, but every day is a new experience. Every quilt I see, I cherish, I honor, I learn something from it. And so I'm still continuing to grow and stretch myself as an artist. I want to continue to explore my creative process and to really be more intimate and intentional about what I create, the feelings that come up when I'm in the creative process, and to really dig a little deeper. Every quilt I want to go deeper into myself when I create that quilt. And basically to expand my creative voice. Quilts are a wonderful way to communicate with people, and as long as my quilts keep communicating, my journey has no destination. The next slide, please. So we're going to let the quilt speak for a few minutes. Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi has been an instrumental person in my life. She's been a North Star on my quilting journey. She was the first curator who invited me to a national show, and I've been in many of her shows, and I am just so humble and honored to always say her name, because she has really elevated so many African American quilters in this country. So I just honor Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi. And one of the quotes that she has is, "Quilts articulate a powerful language of familiarity through which they may speak to and about our experiences as human beings." So I thought that was a great segue into talking about some of the quilts. So I will, that's the last one, Joyce. No, I'm sorry, no problem. So I don't know how we want to do this. I can chat about each one. I know I think everybody's nodding. Is that,
Yes.
are we in agreement to that?
Yes.
Okay, all right then. So I named this exhibit, I didn't think about a name, till Joyce said, well, it'd be nice if we had a name, so I'm like, okay. So I named the quilt, the exhibit, "We Emerged Along the Journey," because that's what happened. I don't know how these quilts came about. Honestly, I don't. I just know that there was a call, a theme, a response to something, and I had to come up with something, and this is what emerged out of that. So that's why I named the exhibit, "We Emerged Along the Journey." I guess it's best to start in the beginning. So this is my first quilt, that purple one. I completed that quilt in 1999. The African American Quilt Circle officially started in March of 1998, and we had our first exhibition in 1999. I didn't finish the quilt in time to be in the exhibition. And again, this is probably the most traditional quilt that I've made, but I was determined to finish it whether I was struggling with it or not. So that's the first one. And I called it Scrappy Beginnings for two reasons. One reason is I used scraps that I had. A lot of those scraps I had been dragging around for years from sewing clothes right out of high school and things like that. So I'm like, okay, this is a nice way to use up those scraps. So I called it Scrappy Beginnings for that reason, and also to represent the scrappy beginnings I had as a child. And I won't get into that story, that's another one, that's for another day, but it really just symbolized that you can start from one point and you never know where you're going to end up. So that's Scrappy Beginnings. So I'm going to go to the last quilt, and then we'll go in between. So the quilt closest to the elevator, the one with the sun rays, I just finished that quilt last month, as a matter of fact, June. And that quilt was really, It started out with the face and the flowers. One of our quilt members, she did a workshop with our quilt circle on, making a lady's face and some flowers. I told you I'm not really good at classes, so I didn't finish, but I was determined I'm going to do something else with the quilt. So almost a year later, I just started, doing the lady, and everything just kind of kept coming up. I'm still trying to understand what that quilt really means. I have not written a description about it because it's still fresh, number one. And number two, I'm still not sure exactly what all that entails. I named that quilt Sage in Wisdom Land, and someone here asked me about the names of my quilts. And this is a good example of one because I didn't know what I was going to call it. But little things kept coming into the quilt. I'm like, it seems like this lady has a lot of wisdom or something. I don't know. So I said, well, man, I don't want to call her, I don't know. Sage came up. So I said, I think that's a nice name. So then it felt like I needed to put some context around where she was. It's like she's in a place. She's not just by herself. So then I said, well, she has to be somewhere. So where could she be? Well, if she has a lot of wisdom, maybe she's in Wisdom Land. So that's kind of weird, but that's how that one came up. So I'm still trying to figure that one out, okay? So that's my last quilt. Now we can go over to this. This is a soft sculpture mask that I created in 2008. I collect masks, number one, and I like dimensions in my quilts, as you can see. So this was an opportunity. I said, I have a mask, the same mask shape at home. And I said, one day I looked at it, I said, I wonder if I can make that out of a quilt. So there you go. So it was trial and error, but I really liked the results. And when I put it next to the original wooden mask, they vibe with each other. So that was the African mask quilt. I hope to make more of those three-dimensional pieces too. This quilt, this is a heavy quilt. This quilt was made for a traveling exhibition that Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi curated, and it's in tribute to Ida B. Wells. I have made several quilts on lynching. I think that is a topic that's somehow is stirring up in my spirit, and aspects of that horrific moment in this history needs to be expressed. So I have some other quilts in the works for that one, but this quilt I did in tribute to Ida B. Wells and the work that she did against anti-lynching. This quilt was in an exhibition. It traveled around the country, I think, for like 4 years. And there's some other things that are going to be happening with this quilt that I'm not at liberty to share right now. So I'm glad that I can spend time with her because I may not see her for a while, but this is Ida B. Wells. And, people ask a lot of questions about this quilt. So I'll hold that if you have any questions at the end, okay? This quilt over here, it was a challenge quilt that I made for the African American Quilt Circle. We have exhibits every 18 months, and we usually have a theme for that exhibit, and we also have like a challenge. So this challenge was for the quilter to create a quilt in collaboration with a musician or a piece of music. So the music there were some artists that sent tapes of their music, and we selected which one we wanted to use. So the artist that I used, I think the name of the song was Energy or something like that, and that's just the result of what I came up with. So this quilt on the end, the blue quilt, this quilt I made in 2018. It's called Breakthrough. I don't know why, but it's called, it's called Breakthrough. The next quilt you'll see, the blue quilt, is called Code Blue. And I made this quilt in 2016. And the quilt started off, I like to repurpose fabrics. I'm always buying something and cutting it up and saving it for that day that it comes in handy. And the middle sections, where you see the lettering, they were pockets of some jeans. Yeah, I had no clue until I deconstructed the pair of jeans, and I'm like, I started to throw them away. I said, no, I don't think I need to throw those away. So I don't know what they mean. It doesn't say anything, but it was intentional. Why would they have that on jeans, inside the pocket? So that's why I named it Code Blue. The name just kind of came up with something. It's a code for somebody. We may not know what it is, but somebody at some time knew what that meant in those pocket lining. So I called that Code Blue. And when I started thinking about it as a code, I thought about the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, the codes that they may have used to send messages to each other. And so I started kind of thinking what codes mean, and everybody doesn't have to recognize them, but they still exist. So that's Code Blue. The next, it's still a quilt because it's 3 sections. It's called Universal Rhythms, and I made that quilt in 2006. It's another sculptural piece. One of my quilt members, matter of fact, it was the same quilt member who did the workshop with the lady and the flowers. She also did a workshop for our quilt circle, and we did a guitar. Everybody did something different, but she kind of gave us the shape, and that's what I came up with. And I call it Universal Rhythms. I love music, and I love all kinds of music, and I just thought it was just a fabulous project. The patches that you see on the guitar, they were patches that I found on a sweater in a thrift store a long time ago. And I'm like, I couldn't fit the sweater, but I said, those patches are kind of cool. So I just kept them for years. And as I was making that instrument, I said, oh, those patches. And so, I'm sorry, I get a little animated. That's what these quilts do for you. So I found the patch. I said, this is perfect, but I wanted one local. So I kind of made that patch for Durham, so it kind of blended in a little bit. So that's Universal Rhythms. The next quilt is called Jazz Explosion. I made this quilt in 2010, and I made it for consideration for a traveling an exhibition, a national exhibition. The quilt did not get selected, and that was okay. We got to take the wins and the losses. But I had another quilt. So it was a musical, the exhibition was about music, so that's why I chose jazz, one of my favorite genres of music. And that's kind of what I came up with. The images around, I just started thinking about some of the great jazz musicians of our time, like Thelonious Monk and Billie Holiday, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, people like that, and what if they all had played together? So that's my quilt for Jazz Explosion. Those little kind of circles on the end, those circles were on a vest that I found at the thrift store. And they came in handy. I said, oh, I think I had something I wanted to put there. And then I kept digging and I found those, so I think that works well. The section on the far right, the gray section, is really kind of symbolic of a jazz club, a smoky jazz club. And if you get close to it, like at the very top before you see the chimney, it's like a little, like some section of gauze or tulle that kind of give you that feeling of smoke going up in the air. And if you look real close, you'll see some stitching of some figures. There's a couple that's sitting on a stool. It's maybe 2 or 3 people that I stitched in that gray section. they're at the club having a ball. So that's Jazz Explosion. The next one is one of my favorites, I think. One of my favorite quilts and one of the most challenging quilts that I've made. This quilt was inspired by a quilt that I saw in a small town in North Carolina. I was invited there to speak at a community event, and some of the community members bought quilts. And this family had this quilt that was about 100 years old, if I'm not mistaken, of their, could have been great-grandmother maybe. I was so taken aback with that quilt. It was full of those triangles that are called prairie points. Some people call them pine burr. And this was like a huge, like a bed-size quilt. Zillions of them. Every time I think about it, I was so moved. I was asking all these questions, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. I'm like, wow, that is a lot of work. And the fact that it held up all of those years. So of course, I said, I'm gonna make one of those quilts. I went home and I pulled out fabric and I cut and I cut and I cut and I cut. And this is, all of those triangles are made of 3-inch squares. And this is small. And you fold it, and you fold it, and you make these prairie points. I cut, folded, pressed, stitched 2,446. That's on that quilt. And that's considered a small quilt. Most people who make that style, they're like huge quilts. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of prairie points. So I thought I would bring this to show you this small piece of fabric, which seems real small to me now in hindsight, but that's what I did. It was challenging because it was just so much prep work to get to it, but making it was very simple. I just stitched rows, and they actually are 4 blocks that I put together for the center. Now
How much does that weigh?
You can ask Joyce. Yeah, it's heavy. It's heavy. It absolutely is. The flowers around the edge, that original quilt had flowers incorporated in the design. And it was like maybe upholstery fabric or something. The flowers were kind of faded, but it was just a beautiful quilt. So I wanted to pay homage to that quilt. And so I added those flowers as a border. So I'm hoping that I did that quilt to justice by, picking up the mantle of what she created 100 years ago. And hopefully 100 years from now, somebody will spot that quilt and be as in awe as I was about her quilt. So that's Gumbo Spice. I called it Gumbo Spice because as I was stitching the triangles, it was just hot. And I found myself saying, whoa, I'm hot, whoa, I'm hot. And so I named it Gumbo Spice. That's that one. And we already talked about my latest quilt, Sage and Wisdom Land.
What about the eyes of both Jazz?
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. The eyes, they're called soul eyes. I made those in 2020 for a special exhibition for Sacred Threads. Joyce mentioned Sacred Threads in her remarks. And this was another quilt. It was a small challenge that they did outside of the main exhibition, and they had a call for people to make eyes. You could do it anything you wanted, and it had to be that size. And so the last time I got an email saying, this is the final, email to submit something, I said, I probably can just throw something, And I'm so glad I did. I really am, because it was something quick, and it ended up traveling for like 2 years, I think. Had no clue. And what they did, the way they displayed it, and now after I saw the display, I realized why they were particular about the size, that all of them had to be that size, because they displayed them on like boxes. like the end of these narrow boxes, and all you saw was eyes and eyes. It was just amazing. There was eyes on each, all around the box. It was amazing. So sometimes you don't have to do a whole lot. You just got to show up. And so that's what I did. So that is called Soul Eyes, and I made it in 2020. Nina Simone. This quilt was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first quilt that I had accepted into a national traveling exhibition. Again, curated by Dr. Carolyn Maslumi. It was, the exhibition was called Textural Rhythms, and I chose to do Nina Simone. I love Nina Simone, and that could probably be another lecture on how much she has meant to me. But I wanted to show her not only as a musician, you see it's the shape of the piano, but I also wanted to show her advocacy. And she was a civil rights, activist. And so you'll see the cloud because, she is deceased. And I just wanted that cloud to kind of represent where we know she is, but still connecting what she's done on this earth and the influences she has had on so many, many, many people. The kind of wiggly lines in the piano top part, I just wanted it to kind of, I played her music a lot when I was creating this quilt. And I just wanted somehow, how can I just show that music, the sound and the feeling? And so that's the best I could do, to put those lines there. This was my first portrait quilt that I did. And it was a learning curve, I'll say that. But it looks like Nina, and I was satisfied. I was pleased with it. So that's Nina Simone, and it's called Resurrecting Nina. The next one you may recognize. If you don't, that's me. That's my self-portrait. Again, I sound like I'm repeating myself, but my quilt circle, we had another challenge for one of our exhibitions, and it was to do self-portraits. And so that's the one that I chose. It's called The Me That I Want to Be, and I made it in 2011. And I chose to use colors versus exclusively flesh tones because I just feel like that's the inside of me, and hopefully people can, some of that exudes on the outside. You can be the judge of that. But that's the one. That's my self-portrait, the me that I want to be. Right below that quilt, and that's the second portrait quilt that I did. So it's nice that they're right there together. The hands that you see on the stand there, again, I like to do experiment with sculptural pieces, and so I created these hands in 2013. And I called the piece When Hands and Cloth Meet. And I would like to just read this, it's brief, okay? I have been fascinated with hands since I was a child. I believe hands are powerful, they tell stories, and they connect us to one another. My fascination with hands has resulted in me collecting hands, photographing hands, and of course using hands in my artwork. This sculpture celebrates what occurs when I use my hands to create quilts. Something magical happens when hands and cloth meet. My hands become tools to create and become vessels that connect me with the essence of who I am as an artist. And so those strips there kind of represent the creativity coming out of my hands. There's a lot of imagination in this stuff, okay? So that's that one. The next quilt, we're almost done. The next quilt was also done for an exhibition on human rights. And we could select one of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights articles, and I chose the right to rest. and relax. I put it in that block on the left-hand side. So this was a challenging quilt for me because I couldn't really figure out, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, I was just stumped. Usually things start popping in my head once I get the topic, but this one I just couldn't figure out, what do I put about rest, the right to relax and rest and from work. So then a light bulb kind of went off in my head, and I said, well, what happens when you don't have that right? Or what does that look like when you want to rest and relax, but you really can't? And so that led me to think about domestic workers, and so it just kind of morphed into this quilt that you see. I put different nationalities from different parts of the country, of the world, and I put the maps behind them to show that it's a common issue, it's a common cause, and that domestic workers' rights are human rights. So this one is called No Rest for the Weary, and I made this quilt in 2016.
What about the dial? Help me with.
Okay, that's a good question. It's if you get a chance and look closer, you'll see that those fabrics represent like some kind of household work or something, like it's a stove on there, I think it's some irons or something. So that's kind of just represents that. And the circle was more about time.
Sure.
Like you don't have time, you don't have time to rest and relax because you're too busy doing all of those things. And
the bubble above it.
the bubble above it is imagining, what does this feel like if I could relax? And the lady that's on the little beach chair, it's another find. She was on a denim dress I found in the thrift store. And I said, I like that, just the thought of her with her hands up and and I had it for a long time, and that when I was creating this quilt, I'm like, I need to be able to show not just what they do, but the contrast of what they should be doing. And so I thought of that, I found it, and that kind of worked. So she's kind of dreaming and thinking about what it would look like. Okay?
Love it.
And then we talked about Scrappy. So the last one here is a labyrinth. I always struggle saying that word. I made this quilt in 2010, and it really, it's one of my favorite quilts. I love purple. I love the color. Everything about that quilt worked for me. It worked. And that's not, I can't say that with everything. I kind of figured out what I wanted. The actual design is a pattern that was adapted from a floor design in the St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And the labyrinth versus the maze, you have one way in, all leading up to the center, where the maze has many entrances and exits. In the center of that piece is I stitched it in gold thread. You can't see it until you get really close up on it. It's the Adinkra symbol, Gianame, which means except for God. So I think that's a very spiritual piece for me, because we're all trying to get to that center. And that's all of the quilts. One or two more slides, and I think we can wrap this up. So I'm always amazed at, when I see my quilts, I'm just as fascinated and intrigued like everybody else is, because you rarely see them like this, and you tend to look at one quilt at a time. But when you see them together and you don't know how they're going to be together, somehow they work and they end up talking together and creating that collective voice. So I'm excited to see them, and I hope you are too. So why do I create? I'm going to close with just, if you don't mind, I would like to read this because it really is the driving force for what I do. Why I create. I believe we are all creative beings, imbued with unique ways to express our creative gifts. Some people's creative gifts are obvious to them, and they have a very early and clear path towards that creative identity. Others venture into many creative outlets, like I did, and explore different artistic mediums before something speaks intimately to their creative soul. I also believe that expressing one's creativity, one's creative self, is a gift and a responsibility that each of us owes to the world, in which we are blessed to be a part of. And so I quote. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't talk too long.
Let's see, I think we have about 10 minutes for some quick Q&A.
Any questions?
Burning questions. I know a lot of you are just eager to go take a closer
Yes.
look.
So I love that you've said, that the exhibitions are the driving factor. Do you create some quilts and then, okay, here's the exhibition that fits, or do you create the quilts when you
Yes.
see the exhibition? You
Yes.
say, and
Yes.
that's the driving factor
Yes.
for, yeah.
Yes.
How exciting
Right.
that means.
Like pretty much that's what happens. There'll be a call for an exhibition, and it's usually a theme. And you can either create a quilt that connects to that theme, and then select your work and hope you're accepted. Or you can be invited, which a lot of these that I expressed here today, I was invited to be included in this exhibition. And I got the theme, like with this Ida B. Wells quilt, it was a timeline of African American history from enslavement up until the present time, at that time that the exhibit was done. And so I knew I wanted Ida B. Wells. And so she was on the list and no one had grabbed her, so I got her. So it kind of happens like that. Any other questions? Yes.
How do these quilts get put together? I mean, do you have special sewing machines, or is it by
Oh,
hand?
that's a good question. I piece by machine. And when I say piece, like the top part, 9 times out of 10, most of that is just pieced on a sewing machine. I don't have a fancy sewing machine. I mentioned earlier that when I started quilting in high school, I invested in a sewing machine that I had for years until maybe 10, 15 years ago. Time flies. And the machine broke, and they couldn't repair it. So I had just a basic Sears Kenmore sewing machine for a long, long time. I started out hand quilting. I love hand quilting. And the Jazz Explosion, you can see that's hand quilted, and several of these other ones are, because these are some of my earlier works. The hand quilting is I love it. It connects you so much intimately with the piece. But I found that when I started entering exhibitions, it just took too long to complete something. So I had to kind of give in and start machine quilting. And I'm just a basic machine quilter. I just use it to keep the quilt all together. It's not a primary focus on the quilt. Maybe as I get better and have these fancy designs, it may become more of a focus. But yes, I piece by machine. I still hand quilt when I can, but majority of my quilts now are machine quilted. And I just do the basic free motion quilt, stitching. I don't know too much else than that.
Sauda, will you tell us just a little bit about the polymurray?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, that's the quilt that's downstairs in the sanctuary. There was an exhibition in Durham, North Carolina, that was commemorating the centennial of Pauli Murray. And it was sponsored by the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South. And I created a quilt for her, and it's called Heart of a Warrior. The Reverend Dr. Anna Pauline Murray. And it was created in 2010, and the exhibit was held at the church. And it was really just a quilt that celebrates her life and all of her contributions from being a lawyer, a priest. I mean, she was a trailblazer. She was way ahead of her time. And so that was a great exhibition that we did. And I was happy to be a part of that. So if you get a chance before you leave, you can look at that one as well. Thank you for reminding me of that one. Yes.
How long does it take you from when you see the call for an exhibition
Ooh.
and to complete the quilt? Is that a long time?
That's a loaded question.
And then you go from one quilt at a time, or do you have several of them going on simultaneously?
It takes a long time. If you add all of the time, from the moment you go through the process, trying to figure out what you're going to do, that's time. Trying to brainstorm ideas, that's time. And I tend to work, especially for quilts that are going to be part of an exhibition, you know, I just have to map everything out. You know, I go through a lot of research and a lot of prep work, and I pretty much have a sense of how it's going to look. I mean, I'm not rigid enough to say if this don't work, I'm just going to stop. I mean, I'm flexible, but I have to have something to start from. So I do all of that work ahead of time. And then it's the challenge of actually creating it. Because I think after I put all that energy in, it's done, but it really isn't. So it takes a long time. Usually you get, usually you get a pretty good time from the call, finding out you were accepted.
So like a year or so?
It could be. I mean, sometimes you get a heads up that it may be 2 years coming. But then if you, I mean, I know there's quilters in the room or creators that can attest, you wait to the last minute, you know? So you may have had 18 months, but then you look up and it's 2 months and I have to hurry up, you know? So some of these quilts that, you know, once I made them, I'm like at that final hour. And then I just have to rush to the UPS and ship them out. So I don't even really know I don't even get a chance to really engage with them. That's just my style, I guess. So I hope I answered your question.
One more question.
Where do you get your stash?
That's another loaded question. Everywhere and anywhere. I mean, I'm committed to repurposing, so I'll tear up something in a minute. I do buy at quilt shops though, but it could be anywhere. It could be an old dress. It could be $15 yard, $20 yard fabric. I mean, it's a combination. But I have a lot of fabric, a lot of stuff, and I love embellishments. You know, I like dimensions on my quilt, so that's a whole nother level of collecting that you also have.